Gemma and Milo, Part 11 and 12. The thing about riding in a mysterious air balloon through the dark, starry night is that you do not get to decide where it goes. This might have worried most people, and most lemurs. But Gemma and Milo lay down for the night, too exhausted to think. The basket of the balloon was large and thick enough that the cold sky air didn't bother them. Gemma asked Milo if he'd like to cuddle up and got an enthusiastic nod in return. Soon they fell asleep, nestled up and cozier than anyone had a right to be inside a floating hot air balloon. Gemma dreamed of the night her mum took her to the waterfall. She remembered the glistening stream. She pictured the bright stars shining in the sky, the mud, the gold, and her mother. The stuff of dreams, she murmured in her sleep. There were still parts that she couldn't remember from that night. It had been so long ago. She had tried not to think about it. The days that followed, the days after her parents went away, were even more of a blur. She had been given a tearful goodbye and put on a train north. After that, she was passed to and fro and ushered from here and there by friends of her parents. Some called themselves aunts or uncles and bragged about how far back they go. Others told her remarkable and dramatic stories of how they met her parents. Usually it was a grand adventure that Gemma was too young to remember, or too not yet born to have been there. There was a gruff man with extensive knowledge of plants, a set of twins who were born in the desert region, or Astoria, and longed to go back, and an archaeologist who had only met her parents a few times but was excited that they had asked her for a favour. Gemma could remember at least a dozen of them. More than that, she remembered the one thing they all seemed to agree on. They wouldn't tell Gemma a thing about where her parents had gone. Whenever she asked, they would tense up like a cold clam in an ice bath. "It's not my business to say," said a particularly chatty woman. He certainly thought everything else was her business, and who continued with a story about her sister's broken foot. It was a young archaeologist who finally dropped Gemma off by carriage next to a long, warped dock on the edge of Harborough. "This is where I leave you," said the archaeologist, unloading Gemma's bag. "I have so many things I'd like to discuss with your parents. Do tell them that I said hello. You will, won't you?" she asked. Gemma looked up with a blank expression. "When you see them next, I mean," added the archaeologist, realizing her mistake. and beginning to panic. Which I'm sure will be soon, or, sooner than you think at least, she said, digging up a smile from the time she had meant it, dusting it off and offering it up to Gemma as genuine. I will, said Gemma. The carriage rode off, and Gemma sat on the edge of the dock, dangling her feet over the edge. She always loved staring at the water. It calmed her and called to her at the same time. If she had stayed any longer, she would have fancied a swim, even then. But a familiar voice, the first familiar voice she had heard in weeks, called out to her. This cannot be my Gemma, bellowed her Uncle Horace. His tree-trunk arms lifted her onto her feet and then right off them again, in what was, to date, the best hug she had ever gotten. My Gemma is as tiny as a rabbit. This young lady is much too grown and distinguished to be my Gemma. He squeezed her tightly, and Gemma felt the weeks of travel leave her in a puff of salty breath. Where have my parents gone to? She asked, hearing then that she was crying. When can I go home? Uncle Horace sat her down again and crouched until they were eye to eye. I don't know where they'll be, answered Horace, and the truth is, neither do they. Gemma wiped the tears from her eyes. The first honest answer she had gotten in weeks, terrible as it was, gave her strength she hadn't expected. Horace grabbed her bags and started walking towards the far end of the dock to a row of 3 boats. As for a home, mine is the sea. Come, let me show you around, he said. Gemma spent the next few years travelling the world with her Uncle Horace. For the first few months, she stopped at every port to ask if there had been word from her parents. Soon it became less frequent until, finally, she had stopped asking altogether. Instead, she focused on her uncle's lessons, each building on the last. First, she learned the ways of the sea, learning how to clean the boat, then to repair it. Navigation came easiest of all. On land, her uncle taught her about new cultures, new foods, and new skills. He spent months learning accounting in Far Roath. She learned trading and negotiation in Marlington, tracking in Greenworth, fighting in Tarpit. Her uncle showed her the wonders that her parents had kept secrets from her. By the time she was ready to be a captain herself, she had learned everything there was to learn about a seafaring life. But it was waking up from a peaceful sleep on the floor of the hot air balloon that she had realized the biggest lesson he had taught her. Gemma had learned to make any place her home. The hot air balloon sailed over a snow-topped mountain just as the sun was coming up. Milo asked to be picked up to see the view. He sat on Gemma's shoulders and looked out over the landscape, the full view of everything around them. Past the mountain, there were rolling green hills, as far they both could see. On the horizon, the last point before the earth curved away from view. Gemma caught a glimpse of something shiny. As the balloon moved closer, she realized it was a glint of the sun hitting water. It was a beautiful lake, and it was just getting larger by the second. It was growing. Not just because they were moving over it, but because they were also dropping towards it. The balloon started falling, slow and smooth, towards the lake. In the very centre, there was a circle that wasn't shining with the sun's reflection. No water. It was a circle of dry land, and the water was held back by a stone wall. And in the centre of the circle, there was a small silver dome. When you put it all together, the lake, the circle, and the dome, it looked like a bullseye, and they were right on target. The balloon cleared both the water and the wall and touched down onto the dirt floor. It kicked up some dust and stopped just in front of the silver dome. "Seems like this is our stop," said Gemma. Gemma and Milo stepped out of the balloon by unlatching a thin wicker door. She hadn't seen the door in the dark of Willow's tree, which was a lucky thing, since opening it then would have led nowhere good. "What do you think it is, Milo?" asked Gemma, staring straight up the slope of the dome. It was made up of curved panels, each one stretched to a hole on top. A little closer to the side, where they stood, Gemma and Milo split up and walked around the base from opposite directions. She ran her hand along the side panels, hoping that she wasn't missing something, hoping that there was a way in that she hadn't yet spotted. When Milo passed her on the other side with a shrug, Gemma was more confused than ever. They finished their loops just to be certain. "How are we supposed to get in?" she asked. Milo pointed to the hole above them and got into a crouching position. Gemma asked with concern, "Are you sure?" Milo nodded and set his sights on the hole. "Okay then," she said, gripping him by the fur on his back and winding up. "Good luck!" Gemma flung Milo through the air, as high as she could. He set his arms out straight ahead to aid his flight, but barely a second later, Milo hit the side of the dome with a thud and came sliding back down, screeching against the metal. He dropped down next to Gemma and shook his head. All he could do was look up with a frown. "May I hug you?" asked Gemma. Milo nodded and got a squeeze from Gemma that made him instantly smile. "It was a great try," she said, "but there must be another way in. Not everyone has a high-flying friend like you." Gemma reached out and touched the side of the dome again. She knocked on the thick metal. "We can't go through. There's no door." She looked up at the hole that Milo had tried to reach. "And we can't go over it. What does that leave us?" Milo looked down at his feet. That's when she spotted a small hole. It was just like the holes they had seen inside the cave on the Forgotten Island. He jumped up and down and pointed until Gemma saw it. She recognized it instantly, not just from the cave, but also from the jungle so long ago, where she met the golden mole. "That's it!" she exclaimed. "We need to go under, like a mole would. That's why the wall is holding back the water, so we can dig." Milo and Gemma dug with their hands for a long while. In fact, they spent the whole day digging. They only took breaks for food and water, both of which were running low. By the start of dusk, they had dug below the side of the dome and finally poked through on the other side. A small pile of dirt started to form inside the dome, along the edge. As Gemma and Milo's hole got bigger and bigger. When it was wide enough, Milo crawled through and dug from inside. Within minutes, Gemma was able to pull herself through with enough space to be comfortable. She popped up and looked around. It was like nothing she'd ever seen. "What is this place, Milo?" Gemma asked. Milo couldn't answer her because he was Lima, but equally so because he had no idea. It had taken them exactly 2 shakes of lamb's tail to look around, since there was only one object inside. If you don't count them and their pile of dirt, dear friend. It was an enormous wooden cube set on a complicated structure and angled up towards a hole in the dome. Without a word more, they both walked towards it. The light of the day was fading, and it would be dark in a few minutes. Gemma touched the tube. She saw a much smaller tube attached at the low end, facing up towards them. And she saw a set of dials. It was then that she realized what it was. "This is a telescope," she exclaimed. "My mum showed me how to use one when I was little. It's a bit bigger than anyone I've ever seen in real life, though." But she had seen one that large in a book called The Extraordinary Essential Guide to Modern Marvels. It belonged to her uncle's friend, Martha Groundgrubble, the second best adventurer around, as her uncle would call her. As the two of them recounted tales from their journeys across the 8 seas, Gemma would read the massive book quietly. She had seen a room like this before, only it was filled with dozens of people, all boring looking. Gemma remembered, and the telescope in the center was made of shiny metal. Still, she recognized the setup well. "Do you know where we are? This is an observatory," she said to Milo. Milo smiled and nodded like he had known all along. But, dear friend, he had not. Gemma now knew what the small tube was, an eyepiece. "That's where you look through," she explained. "And you move these dials to move the big tube all around to look at different spots in the sky. And this book..." Gemma picked up a book that was resting on a small platform near the eyepiece. "Well, I'm not sure what this book is, actually." The cover was black, without any words. She thumbed through the pages, and it was more of the same. Blank and blank. "I don't get it," she wondered. "What's the point of a book with nothing inside?" But as the sunlight left the observatory, and the little bit of light that was peeking through the hole in the top fluttered away, something changed. The cover started to shine in 1,000 little dots. They were stars, a galaxy's worth. Gemma opened the book and found that the pages had stars now too, lit up to show constellations. Each constellation had their name underneath and numbers beside them. Gemma knew that the numbers were settings, and that turning the dials to those numbers would show her a constellation when she looked through the eyepiece. Her mum had taught her well. Satyrs, she read aloud. That's the sea monster constellation. Milo looked scared and hid behind her leg. Gemma couldn't help but chuckle. Oh, there's nothing to fear, Milo. A constellation is just a group of stars. Ancient explorers drew the stars that they saw, and they connected the dots to make the shapes of animals and objects. Mum always used to say they were drawings in the sky. Milo relaxed and nodded along again. Most of them are fantastical creatures. I used to know them all. She continued as she flipped through the pages. Monoceros, that's the unicorn constellation. And this one is Phoenix. Let's try that one. Gemma moved the dials carefully until they were read the same as the numbers that were glowing brightly on the page. As she turned the knobs, the entire dome and telescope spun around slowly. Milo had to grab on to the base to not fall over. Next, the telescope tilted up until it pointed almost right above their heads. The hole followed this telescope in a mystical way. The curved metal slats that made up the dome moved and slid around it to make sure of it. When it stopped moving, Gemma looked through the eyepiece with wonder. My gosh, Milo, there it is, and clearer than ever, Gemma said with a smile. Milo looked through next and couldn't hide his excitement either. As he looked at the constellation, Gemma searched through the book once again. It was on the 24th page that she froze. Her fingers stopped on the constellation she was meant to find, and she hadn't heard its name since the night her mother left. Sorry, but this story is to be continued. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, share and subscribe so you don't miss out the next part. Comment down below what was your favourite part if you enjoyed this video, and what the name of the constellation is. If you'd like to know what the name of the constellation is, maybe go back to one of our old videos and you might find it. Thank you for watching and goodbye.